You're not broken, but something inside you has been slowly dying. You can't name it, you can't explain it, but every time you look in the mirror, it's there, that quiet frustration, that silent voice whispering, "You're not the man you're supposed to be." It didn't happen overnight. It was death by 1,000 cuts. You started compromising, tolerating mediocrity, chasing comfort over courage. And now you feel it, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy. You laugh less, you move slower, you second-guess your words, and deep down you know you've been playing small. But here's the truth. It's not depression. It's the habits that have been silently killing your confidence, one day at a time. And in this video, we're going to expose every single one of them, one by one, with brutal honesty and stoic clarity. There's a man I used to know, let's call him Jack. From the outside, Jack had everything. A well-paying job in tech, a loft downtown, a gym membership he used 3 times a week. But if you sat across from him at a bar or caught him lost in thought in the mirror, you'd see it. Something missing. Not quite sadness, not exactly fear, just a slow erosion of self. A quiet voice whispering, "You're not enough." Jack couldn't name it at first. He blamed burnout, blamed the news cycle, blamed dating apps that turned connection into swiping fatigue. But none of that explained why. After small setbacks, a missed promotion, a text left on read, his self-worth crumbled like wet paper. The truth was brutal. Jack wasn't just tired. His confidence was dying, and he didn't know why. But Stoicism did. That ancient philosophy, weathered and worn by time, still speaks to modern chaos like it was carved yesterday. And it shows us that confidence isn't built by shouting affirmations or collecting trophies. It's built by subtracting the noise, by stripping away the habits that quietly rot us from within. Jack was living proof. Confidence doesn't just get crushed in car crashes or public failures. Sometimes it starves in silence, killed by habits we don't even notice. Habits that look harmless, maybe even normal, until one day you wake up and realize you've become afraid of your own reflection. So let's go deeper, not with more fluff or feel-good slogans, but with the fire of truth, the kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m., not in fear, but in clarity. Because confidence isn't something you chase. It's something you stop killing. And for that, we turn to Stoicism, not as a dusty set of rules, but as a scalpel, to cut out what no longer serves us, to return to what's simple, grounded, and strong. Have you ever wondered why you sometimes feel weaker the more you try to improve? Why the more you read, hustle, perform, the emptier you feel inside? That's not failure, it's friction, a sign that you're building on sand. And what Stoicism teaches, what Marcus Aurelius whispered to himself in a war tent and Epictetus taught with broken chains, is this: confidence isn't loud, it's quiet, it's clean, and it only thrives when the soul is not at war with itself. You don't need to add more to be strong, you might just need to subtract the poison. So ask yourself, what quiet, everyday habits are draining your strength while you're not looking? Let's go back to Jack. Every morning, the first thing he did, before brushing his teeth, before speaking a word, was scroll. TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, a dozen voices before his own, a dozen curated lives to compare to his. He didn't think much of it. Everyone does it, right? But what he didn't realize was that this tiny ritual, 15 minutes here, 20 there, was slowly training his brain to outsource self-worth. He was giving away his attention, his will, his direction, before the day had even begun. His inner compass, hijacked by strangers dancing for likes. The Stoics would have called this a failure of prohairesis, our rational faculty, our power to choose what we attend to. When you surrender that, even in small doses, you become reactive. You chase the moods of others. You measure your worth against illusions. And confidence? It doesn't survive long in that storm. Jack's real power didn't come back when he read another book or watched another TED Talk. It came back the day he sat in silence for 5 minutes, no phone, no noise, and listened to the quiet rebellion of his own mind. That's when the war turned. It's ironic, isn't it? The things that drain us most are the ones we defend as normal. Social scrolling, gossip, half-hearted distractions that numb us just enough to avoid the deeper discomfort of growth. But Stoicism reminds us what is normal isn't always natural, and what is popular is rarely powerful. If someone could see your morning habits like a movie reel, would they say you're building a warrior or feeding a ghost? Now, not all of Jack's self-betrayals were digital. Some were softer, more subtle, like his inability to say no to friends, to colleagues, to invitations he didn't want. He told himself he was being nice, but underneath, he was afraid. Afraid of seeming rude, afraid of being alone, afraid of disappointing people. Seneca wrote, "If you don't know to which port you are sailing, no wind is favorable." Jack didn't know his own destination, so he drifted. Said yes when he meant no, smiled when he felt resentment, and every yes that betrayed his boundaries quietly ate away at his spine. Confidence can't grow where self-respect is leaking, and people-pleasing, though praised in our culture as politeness, is often a slow death of identity. You don't wake up one day shattered, you just lose yourself piece by piece, like sand slipping through your fingers. Jack's turning point came not in anger, but in a whisper. What if I said no? And nothing bad happened. He tried it, a party invite, a last-minute work favor, a friend who only called when they needed something, and something miraculous happened. He survived. Not only that, he felt lighter, sharper, more present. Stoicism teaches us that virtue is the only true good, which means you are not required to abandon yourself to be liked. You are not responsible for another's disappointment when your choices are aligned with your principles. This is not arrogance, it is sovereignty. Every time you say yes to what you don't want, you're saying no to who you are. So what have you been quietly rejecting in yourself? Even the strongest men crumble, not from one heavy blow, but from the weight of constant self-abandonment. I remember the night Jack admitted something that changed everything. He said, "I don't trust myself." Not because he lied or cheated, but because he broke promises to himself daily. Promised he'd wake early, didn't. Promised he'd hit the gym, skipped. Promised he'd speak up, stayed silent. They were small betrayals, but they added up. And when a man can't trust his own word, no praise from others can fix the fracture. The Stoics believed character is forged in action, not intention. You are what you repeatedly do, not what you hope, not what you plan, but what you choose moment by moment, especially when no one's watching. That's what Jack had to reclaim, not perfection, but congruence, the ability to look in the mirror and say, I did what I said I would do. Even once, then twice, then again, and slowly confidence returned, not as swagger, but as stillness, not as noise, but as a calm, steady fire behind the eyes. You want to believe in yourself? Start by keeping the small promises. Your confidence doesn't need a speech, it needs evidence. Jack began small. He chose one thing, waking up when his alarm rang. No snooze. It seemed insignificant, almost childish. But for the first time in months, he kept a promise. He got out of bed, stood in the quiet morning darkness, and didn't reach for his phone. He simply stood there, feeling the weight of his own discipline. He wasn't trying to be heroic. He was trying to heal. That single act rippled. When you do what you say, especially when no one claps, when no one posts about it, you start rebuilding trust with the only person who truly matters, yourself. Stoicism doesn't reward noise. It rewards consistency, and confidence is born from the quiet rhythm of keeping your word. Jack started saying, I train myself. Not I'm trying, not I hope to, but I train. Because life is a practice, not a performance, and confidence isn't found in the outcome, it's built in the process. That's a Stoic truth. We don't control outcomes, but we control effort, focus, and response. And if you master that, really master it, what else can shake you? What if you stopped trying to feel confident and started behaving like someone you could respect? But there was another habit, one that lurked deeper. Jack would often replay conversations in his head, days after they happened. He'd agonize over what he should have said, how he should have acted, why he didn't stand taller. At first it looked like self-awareness, but in truth, it was self-attack. Rumination masquerading as reflection. The Stoics warned about this trap, getting tangled in the past, in things no longer under your control. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Jack wasn't realizing it. He was reliving old defeats, empowering ghosts. Confidence dies in regret loops. When your attention is trapped in the past, it's not available for the present. And the present, the now, is the only place confidence breathes. So Jack began catching himself, mid-rumination. He'd whisper the same question Epictetus might have asked, "Is this under my control?" If the answer was no, he'd release it. Not because it didn't matter, but because his peace mattered more. What invisible courtroom are you still standing in, defending yourself against people who aren't even watching? And then came the stories Jack told himself, not out loud, not in journals, but the quiet narratives that played under the surface. "I'm not the kind of guy who speaks up. I've always been awkward. That's just how I am." These weren't facts, they were prisons, built from childhood echoes, teenage missteps, and a few harsh words that never got questioned. The Stoics taught that we must inspect our beliefs as if we were cross-examining a witness. If a belief weakens you, it's likely a lie, but if it strengthens your virtue, it may be true. So Jack started doing something radical, rewriting, not affirmations, not fantasies, but sober, deliberate narratives that served his character. "I value stillness. I don't avoid discomfort. I train through it. My past is not my fate." You don't have to believe the story right away, but you do have to stop feeding the one that weakens you. As Epictetus said, it's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. And judgments, stories, can be rewritten. What quiet script have you been repeating for years? And is it making you stronger or smaller? Jack wasn't a philosopher. He never studied Stoicism in school, but over time, it started living in him. He began to notice a habit he hadn't seen before, seeking validation, not always directly, but in subtle ways. Oversharing just to be liked, asking for advice he didn't need, saying things to get a reaction instead of speaking from clarity. The need for others to confirm his worth was draining him like a leaky faucet. But Marcus Aurelius said, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Jack started seeing how much of his energy wasn't going to growth, but to control, trying to control how others saw him. And in doing so, he gave away the very self-respect he was trying to build. Stoicism taught him the difference between reputation and character. One you can't fully control, the other is yours to own. So he stopped explaining himself so much. He began moving in silence. He let people misunderstand him without chasing their approval. Not out of bitterness, but out of sovereignty. When you stop performing and start standing, some people will walk away. Let them. You're not here to audition for your own life. And perhaps the most subtle habit of all was this: distraction. Jack always had something playing: music, podcasts, Netflix humming in the background while he cooked. It wasn't entertainment, it was escape. Escape from stillness, from facing himself. But confidence lives in solitude. Not loneliness, but honest solitude. A space where nothing performs and nothing distracts. Just you, your breath, your thoughts, and the truth they whisper when no one's looking. The Stoics practiced this daily: morning meditation, evening reflection, time with the self, not as punishment, but as preparation. Because if you can sit with your thoughts without flinching, you've already won more battles than most people fight. Jack didn't become a monk, but he started walking without headphones, eating without scrolling, driving with the radio off. He let silence become his companion. And in that silence, confidence returned, not as ego, but as alignment. When was the last time you were alone and didn't reach for something to fill the silence? Confidence is not always born from doing more. It often begins by subtracting. Jack began to learn that. But there was still one more thief hiding in plain sight: comparison. Even as he meditated, kept his word, simplified his mornings, he'd still fall into the trap of measuring. A friend announced a promotion. An old classmate bought a house. Some random guy on Instagram had a jawline carved from marble and a yacht in Croatia. Suddenly, Jack's progress felt tiny. His calm felt like laziness. His discipline pointless. But comparison is a liar. The Stoics would call this the disease of externals, valuing what lies outside our control more than what lies within. Epictetus warned us, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Why? Because real progress doesn't always look impressive. Sometimes it's invisible, quiet, uncelebrated. Jack had to train himself to stop worshiping another man's highlight reel. He began to ask different questions. Not am I ahead, but am I aligned? Not how do I look, but how do I live? He realized that confidence doesn't come from being better than someone else. It comes from being unshakably rooted in your own values. He stopped checking how others were doing, not out of bitterness, but out of focus. His journey was not theirs, and the moment he stopped comparing was the moment he started accelerating. Imagine you're running a race, but you keep looking sideways. That's not competition, it's sabotage. So, whose lane are you in? There's something deeply liberating about owning your own lane. It allows for growth without noise, for progress without applause. But it also comes with responsibility. Jack learned that the hard way when he started blaming his past. It's easy to do. Childhood wounds, bad parenting, a cruel coach, a first heartbreak that cracked open more than just trust. Jack had his share, and for a long time he wore those wounds like armor. They gave him identity, even justification. I'm like this because of what happened to me. But the Stoics rejected that mindset. They didn't deny pain, but they refused to be defined by it. The obstacle is the way, said Marcus Aurelius, not as a metaphor, as a battle cry. Jack began to see that confidence was not the absence of scars, but the choice to stop bleeding from them. Yes, his father was cold. Yes, he had been humiliated. But those were facts, not futures. The real question was, what would he do with that pain? Carry it like a cross or forge it into something stronger? He stopped blaming the world and started building himself. Scars are proof you survived, but are you still living like the wound is fresh? That was the shift. From victim to architect. From reaction to intention. Jack was no longer trying to find confidence. He was creating it, brick by disciplined brick. And yet, even with progress, there was one more shadow to face. Perhaps the hardest habit of all, perfectionism. Jack wanted to get it right, always. He obsessed over being stoic enough, strong enough, disciplined enough. But this obsession began to rot his spirit, because perfectionism is not the pursuit of excellence. It's fear in disguise, fear of failing, fear of judgment, fear of being ordinary. The Stoics didn't preach perfection, they preached preparation, training the mind daily, accepting failure as part of growth. As Seneca said, a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. So Jack learned to let go of the fantasy of flawless execution. He started living with the humility of effort. He allowed himself to be bad at things, to mess up, to begin again, and in that humble repetition something beautiful emerged. Confidence, not from being perfect, but from being unafraid. He forgave himself faster. He laughed at setbacks. He moved forward. If you only feel worthy when you're perfect, You've made your worth conditional on something inhuman. So what would it feel like to be confident even when you're clumsy? Jack had come a long way. He no longer started his mornings drowning in other people's lives. He no longer betrayed himself with every yes born of guilt. He stopped worshiping the opinions of strangers. And perhaps most importantly, he stopped abandoning himself. But confidence isn't a final destination. It's a posture, a way of standing inside your own life day after day with the courage to show up, not knowing the outcome. One evening, Jack sat across from me again. He looked the same on the outside, same jacket, same tired eyes, but there was something different. Stillness. Not the quiet of defeat, but the calm of a man who no longer chases storms. I asked him what changed. He didn't list habits. He didn't preach books. He just smiled and said, "I stopped trying to prove myself. I just started living in a way I could respect." That's Stoicism, not emotionless, not robotic, but rooted. Confidence doesn't come from knowing you'll succeed. It comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes and remain yourself in the process. What if your confidence wasn't a mood, but a lifestyle? One choice, one promise, one moment of clarity at a time. Jack still has bad days. He still gets insecure, still feels fear, but now those feelings don't own him. They visit. He nods to them, and he continues. Because the Stoics didn't teach us to erase emotion, they taught us to master our response, to become men and women of character, not chaos. In a world constantly shouting at you to prove, impress, and perform, it takes tremendous inner strength to say, "No, I am enough. I am in training, and I am free." And that, my friend, is where your confidence begins. Not with noise, but with stillness. Not with applause, but with alignment. Not by chasing more, but by subtracting the habits that weaken your soul. So I leave you with this. You don't need to become someone new. You need to stop abandoning who you've always been beneath the noise. You don't need another technique. You need to remove what's in the way. And you don't need the world's permission to be powerful. You just need your own. There's a version of you waiting in the silence. Not perfect, not invincible, but strong, grounded, and finally free. Will you let him speak? There was a moment, quiet, unremarkable, that Jack later told me changed everything. He was walking home late at night, not after a date, not from the gym, just one of those evenings where the city feels half asleep and you're moving through it like a ghost. He passed a storefront window and saw his reflection. Nothing dramatic, no music swelled, no light beamed down, just his own face looking back. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't flinch, he didn't criticize, didn't analyze. He simply looked and nodded, as if to say, "We're good." That moment didn't come from ego, it came from congruence. He had earned his own respect, quietly, slowly, and no one else needed to know. Confidence isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives like this, when no one is watching and nothing is expected. A calm presence, a deeper breath, a steadier walk. It's strange how few people feel that way. So many of us are building outward lives that look strong, while ignoring the quiet decay inside. We're in rooms full of people, but haven't had an honest conversation with ourselves in years. We scroll past 1,000 faces and still feel invisible in our own skin. But Stoicism isn't about impressing others. It's about becoming deeply known to yourself. What if the version of you that you're searching for isn't out there? What if he's waiting in the mirror, but only appears when you stop pretending? There's a reason Stoics practiced evening reflection. At the end of each day, they would sit in silence and ask, "Where did I act according to my values? Where did I fall short? What can I do better tomorrow?" Not to shame themselves, but to know themselves. Jack began doing the same. At first, it felt awkward. He didn't have a mentor or temple or incense, just a quiet apartment and his own thoughts. But slowly, those 5 minutes each night became sacred, not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. He would ask, "Was I aligned today?" Not "Was I perfect?" Not "Was I liked?" just, was I myself? That one question changed the trajectory of his confidence, because alignment builds momentum, and momentum builds belief. You stop asking the world to validate you. You start becoming the kind of man whose actions speak louder than applause. Imagine if the last thing you did before sleep wasn't mindless scrolling, but a quiet audit of your soul. What would you discover? But Jack wasn't immune to the world. None of us are. One week, his company announced layoffs. He wasn't on the list, but his closest teammate was. A friend, gone, just like that. Jack felt the tremor. His mind jumped to panic. What if I'm next? What's my backup plan? Should I leave before I'm pushed? Old patterns returned. Sleepless nights, overthinking, a familiar hollowing of the chest. But this time, he didn't spiral. He turned to Stoic teaching. You have power over your mind, not outside events. He realized the layoff wasn't in his control. The gossip, the rumors, the panic, that wasn't his domain either. But his reaction, his energy, his focus, that was still his. So he made a decision: show up fully, without fear. He came in early, helped colleagues, took ownership, not to be seen, but to serve. Because as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Jack didn't get laid off, but more importantly, he stopped fearing it, because he'd built something no company could take away: internal stability. And from that place, even chaos becomes manageable. Storms will come. The question is, have you built your house on sand or on stone? The Stoics never promised safety, they promised strength. And strength is not immunity from pain, it's resilience within it. There was a day Jack finally cried, not out of weakness, but from the weight he'd carried too long. It was a random Tuesday, nothing triggered it, just years of holding his breath finally released. He didn't run from the tears, he sat with them. Because being stoic is not being emotionless, it's being emotionally honest, without becoming emotionally controlled. Seneca himself grieved deeply when his friend died. Marcus Aurelius lost 8 children and still ruled with dignity. They didn't pretend, but they also didn't let sorrow become identity. Jack's confidence deepened that week, not because he won anything, but because he allowed himself to feel and didn't fracture. He stayed present, he let the wave pass, and when it did, he stood stronger for having faced it. This too is confidence. To know you can survive your own sorrow. What if the strength you're avoiding doesn't come from holding it all in, but from letting go without falling apart? Jack once told me he used to dread silence. Now he craved it, because in the quiet he met the part of himself that was never shaken, never desperate, never small. The part that didn't need to post, perform, or pretend. He started seeing modern life for what it was, a beautiful distraction, but a distraction nonetheless. And the more he pulled back from the noise, the more clearly he saw himself. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, but he was free. Free from compulsive comparison, free from approval addiction, free from the war inside his own mind. And in that freedom, he found something better than motivation, direction. He knew who he was, and he knew what he served. Not impulse, not fear, but virtue. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you finally have space to become something real to yourself. The final transformation came slowly. Not with fireworks, but with choices. Jack started helping others, not preaching, not coaching, just living in a way that invited questions. A coworker noticed, then a friend, then his younger brother. They saw the change, not in words, but in presence. He didn't offer stoic quotes, he offered steadiness. He showed up on time, kept his word, didn't gossip, didn't panic. He listened more than he spoke. And when he spoke, it came from stillness, not performance. And that right there is the final lesson of confidence. It's not about you, not anymore. It begins within you, but its power is in how it ripples. People are starving for presence, for composure, for men and women who carry quiet integrity in a world of noise. You don't need to be loud to lead. You just need to be rooted. Jack became that man, not perfect, but trustworthy, because he had earned his own trust. In a world chasing charisma, maybe what we need more is character. So here we are, 9 habits, none of them flashy, all of them invisible killers of confidence. But Jack's story is not about habits, it's about truth. The truth that confidence isn't something you find, it's something you stop sabotaging. It's not built in a day, but it is built daily. In the moment you stop scrolling, in the breath you take before reacting, in the boundary you set without guilt, in the evening reflection done in silence, in the promise kept when no one is watching. You're not broken, you're not weak, you're just distracted from your center. Stoicism is not about becoming someone else, it's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to doubt yourself. And once you remember, truly remember, your confidence is no longer fragile. It becomes inevitable because it's no longer dependent on applause or outcomes or perfection. It becomes your way of moving through the world, calm, focused, unshakable. So I ask you now, quietly and sincerely, what will your life look like when you stop killing your confidence and start living like the man you already are beneath it all? Jack once read something that stuck with him, not from a philosopher, but from a combat veteran. It said, calm is a superpower. Not calm like boredom, not detachment like avoidance, but the kind of calm forged in fire, a calm that says, I've seen the worst, and I'm still here. He taped that phrase on his bathroom mirror. Every morning, brushing his teeth, it stared back at him. Calm is a superpower, and slowly it became true. You see, most people try to look confident by appearing unbothered. Stoicism doesn't ask you to pretend. It asks you to train, to face discomfort, to sit in the middle of chaos and remain yourself. Jack practiced this in daily life. Traffic? No reaction. Rude cashier? He breathed. Sudden bad news? He paused, not because he didn't feel things, but because he had trained not to be ruled by them. Emotions still came, anger, sadness, stress, but now they passed through him, not over him, like waves that crash, then return to the ocean. He started asking himself the most stoic of questions in every moment. Is this within my control? If yes, act. If no, let go. Confidence came not because life got easier, but because Jack got clearer. What would life feel like if you stopped reacting and started responding with intention? That's where confidence lives. In the pause between impulse and action. It's in that space where the average man explodes, but the grounded man breathes. But this kind of strength doesn't just stay in the mind. It shows up in your body, your tone, your eyes. People feel it when you walk into a room, not as force, but as presence. Jack began to notice this. Strangers treated him differently. Conversation shifted. People leaned in. It wasn't that he spoke more, it's that he said less, but meant every word. His energy wasn't scattered, it was contained, directed, solid. And that kind of presence in a world addicted to noise is magnetic. But it can't be faked. You can't fake it till you make it with real presence. You have to earn it by facing the inner chaos and choosing stillness anyway. That's the Stoic fix for weak energy. Not louder voices, but quieter minds. When was the last time someone felt your presence without you having to prove anything? Jack's circle began to shift, not because he became snobbish, but because the energy he carried no longer tolerated chaos. He stopped chasing people who drained him. He stopped explaining himself to people committed to misunderstanding him. This was a hard truth. Sometimes confidence means walking away. Not out of pride, but out of clarity. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve." Jack realized that he had been entertaining relationships that didn't challenge him, only distracted him. So he did something radical. He spent more time alone. He took solo walks, ate dinner without TV, spent weekends not filling the calendar, but feeling the silence. And in that solitude, something sacred happened. He began to hear his own voice again, not the voice trained to please, but the deeper one, the one that speaks only in silence and doesn't shout. That voice said, "This is who you are. This is what matters." If you've been feeling lost lately, maybe it's not a lack of direction, but a lack of silence to hear your own compass. Jack's confidence wasn't about appearance anymore. It was about alignment. It was about showing up every day and choosing to be someone he respected, even if nobody noticed. That's another lie we're fed, that confidence is a look, a result, an outcome. But the Stoics knew better. Confidence is character expressed consistently. It's the ability to stand on your values even when no one's clapping. It's doing the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong one. It's waking up tired and tempted and still keeping your promise to yourself. That's why it lasts. That's why it doesn't crumble when someone rejects you or criticizes you or passes you over. Because it wasn't built on external approval. It was built on inner coherence. Jack understood now. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need to stop betraying yourself. The loudest form of self-respect is quiet, consistent action that no one sees but you. And then came the test, not in the form of tragedy, but temptation. Jack got offered a position at a rival firm, more money, more title, more status, but something felt off. The company culture was built on ego. The leadership was flashy, performative. The product itself was questionable, but the paycheck, tempting. He spent days wrestling with it. He listed pros and cons, talked to mentors, but in the end, the deciding factor was simple. Would I be proud of the man I become if I said yes? The answer was no, so he declined. His friends thought he was crazy, but Jack felt light, clear, unshaken. That's what real confidence gives you, the ability to say no to shiny things that betray your values. The Stoics taught us to beware of fortune's gifts, because not all that glitters is good. And sometimes what looks like opportunity is a test of integrity. Jack passed, not because he was a hero, but because he had trained for this. His confidence wasn't new, it had just become visible. Confidence is saying no to what looks good, when you know it will cost your soul in the long run. Now Jack lives differently. He still wakes early, still reflects each night. He doesn't chase validation, doesn't rush. He walks like a man with nothing to prove, because he knows exactly who he is. He's not trying to be stoic, he's living it. And that makes all the difference, because you don't have to quote Marcus Aurelius to embody stoicism. You don't need robes or Latin or long meditations. You just need to practice, daily, humbly, quietly, to train your mind, to command your attention, to keep your word, to choose what's right even when it's hard, to forgive your past, to simplify your days, to return again and again to the part of you that cannot be shaken. Rehook. What if you stopped chasing the man you want to be and started behaving like him right now? You are not far from the life you want. You're just a few habits away, and every one of them is already inside you, waiting to be remembered. Your confidence is not missing. It's buried under noise, distraction, guilt, fear, comparison, but you can return to it today, now, by choosing presence over panic, clarity over chaos, virtue over image, and truth over comfort. That's the Stoic path. And it's available to you, not when life is perfect, but precisely when it's hard. Because that's when you train, that's when you forge character, that's when the real you steps forward, silently, powerfully, without needing to be seen. And that's when Jack finally stopped. Not because the world had stopped pressuring him or because things suddenly got better, but because he realized confidence was not something to be earned from the world. It was something he had to stop giving away. There's a difference. You see, we often confuse confidence with momentum. We think it's something that comes from results, from praise, from being on top. But what happens when you lose momentum? When life throws you a curveball? That's when the illusion breaks. That's when most people spiral. That's when men like Jack, and maybe men like you, either crumble or wake up. So he did what very few ever do. He sat still, not out of laziness, but to observe, to pay attention, and to begin pruning the hidden habits that were silently poisoning his strength. One of them, so deeply embedded in modern life, especially in the digital age, was something we often mistake for self-awareness. He realized he was constantly measuring himself in the minds of others. How would this email make him look? Did his coworker respect him? Was he being too quiet, too assertive? Would that woman at the bar think he was confident enough or weird? He wasn't living, he was monitoring. Stoicism taught him that freedom comes not from controlling perception, but from detaching from it. Epictetus once said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." In the same way, if the opinions of others shake your self-belief, it's not their power over you, it's your misplaced attention. Jack began the difficult work of severing that leash. He started small. He'd speak his mind in meetings, even when it felt risky. He stopped explaining his preferences. If he didn't want to go out, he simply said no without the padding of an excuse. He noticed how often he used phrases like "just my opinion" or "I could be wrong," as if he needed to apologize for existing. Each time he dropped one of those ticks, a piece of his dignity returned. And slowly, he began to stand taller, not out of arrogance, but because he was no longer bending to fit spaces that didn't require shrinking. Confidence, he saw, wasn't about becoming someone impressive. It was about unbecoming the man who needs to impress. But that wasn't the end of it, because the next habit ran deeper than people-pleasing. It was something more insidious. It was this quiet, constant consumption of content, noise, advice, ideas. Every spare second of Jack's day had become filled with something. A podcast on productivity while he showered, motivational shorts during breakfast, background YouTube videos while working, news updates, Instagram reels, Stoic quotes. You'd think that would help. But the truth? He was stuffed. Bloated with knowledge, starving for wisdom. He couldn't hear his own inner voice over the volume of other people's, so he stopped inputting and started digesting. Each morning, instead of reaching for his phone, he reached for silence, a short walk, a journal entry, a moment at the window, just watching the light change. He didn't try to optimize these moments, he just let them exist. And in the stillness, clarity emerged. Not as a lightning strike, but like water settling after a storm. That's when the real question surfaced. What have I been avoiding? What pain have I numbed with noise? What strength lies hidden beneath distraction? And that's where you come in. Because I want you to ask yourself this: when was the last time you sat in pure silence? No music, no screen, no goal, just you and your raw, unfiltered being. What would you find in that space? Would you run from it or reclaim it? Take a breath. Let that question linger, because now we need to talk about another confidence killer, one so subtle it wears the mask of humility. It's the habit of diminishing your wins. Jack used to do this all the time. He'd reach a milestone, secure a new client, help a friend through something hard, hit the gym for 90 days straight. And you know what he'd say? It's no big deal. Sometimes out loud, sometimes just in his head. But the impact was the same, a quiet dismissal of his own power. It wasn't modesty, it was sabotage. See, when you constantly downplay your growth, you send a message to your subconscious. Your efforts don't matter, and that is the fastest way to make your inner voice stop showing up. Confidence is built like compound interest. It accumulates when small victories are acknowledged, not ignored. So Jack changed the way he spoke to himself. He started saying, "That was hard, and I handled it." Not boastfully, just factually. He kept a strength journal, where each night he wrote down one thing he did that required courage, discipline, or patience. And over time, he started to trust himself again. He no longer needed outside applause, because he was the one recognizing his worth. Let me ask you something that might sting. How many compliments have you deflected this month? How many small wins have you brushed off? How often have you said, "just lucky," when the truth was, you showed up? Maybe it's time to stop calling that humility and start seeing it for what it is: fear of owning your own power. Now let's pause again, because the next shift will challenge something deep in you. It's about identity, specifically the silent habit of clinging to old versions of yourself. Jack had built his entire adult life around a certain image: the dependable guy, the funny friend, the man who never needed help. But when life shifted, when he got laid off, when his long-term girlfriend left, when his parents fell ill, he felt like a fraud. Why? Because his identity had calcified. He didn't allow himself the flexibility to evolve. He believed he had to keep being the same man, even if that man no longer existed. The Stoics taught him otherwise. "Don't behave as if you are destined to live forever," Marcus Aurelius wrote. "What is it you're holding on to? Why do you resist the nature of things?" That passage hit him like a slap, because he realized that confidence isn't about clinging. It's about adapting with integrity. So Jack allowed parts of himself to die. The old version that always had the answer, the identity built on external roles, the mask of being unshakable. He let those fall away, not to become someone new, but to return to something ancient: presence. And with presence came truth. With truth came stillness. With stillness came power. Now, I want you to imagine something. If you were no longer bound by who you've been, who might you become? What might be possible if you stopped dragging the corpse of your old self into every new day? Let that question hang, because the answers don't come in words, they come in living differently. And yet, in the quiet moments when the world stops demanding and you're left alone with yourself, there's a truth you can't outrun. Your confidence isn't gone, it's just buried. Buried under habits you've normalized, habits that slowly corrode your self-trust like rust eats away steel. One of the most insidious: constant comparison. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up in tiny, habitual glances at others' lives. A friend's vacation photos, a colleague's promotion, the stranger on Instagram with perfect abs and a curated smile. Comparison doesn't need to scream, it just whispers, "You're behind." You begin to measure your worth through someone else's tape, and in doing so, you disown your own life. You become a spectator, not a participant. The ancient Stoics warned about this. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." He wasn't glorifying ignorance. He was inviting you to disengage from the toxic scoreboard of public opinion and cultivate an inner scoreboard, one based on effort, character, and virtue. Marcus Aurelius didn't scroll through anyone's highlight reel. He journaled every night to confront his thoughts and keep himself grounded. When your mind becomes obsessed with what others are doing, you abandon the power you have over your own behavior. True confidence doesn't come from being ahead of others. It comes from being aligned with yourself. It's not just about stopping the scroll. It's about reclaiming the lens through which you view your life. Pause for a moment. Ask yourself this: what if you stopped comparing your journey to someone else's chapter? What if your life isn't behind? It's just different. What would change if you believed that? Imagine a man walking a mountain trail. He keeps looking over at someone else's path across the valley, distracted by their pace, their route, their view. He stumbles again and again, not because the path is dangerous, but because he won't look where he's going. What if confidence was simply the art of watching your own steps? Another hidden habit that guts your confidence like a slow leak in a tire is seeking validation from everyone. You ask for permission before every move. You need others to approve, to like, to say you're okay. And when they don't, when the likes don't come or the message is left unread, you shrink. The Stoics called this slavery, not to chains or masters, but to opinion. Seneca wrote, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." But a mind trained to serve approval cannot lead. It can only follow. The problem isn't that you want to be accepted. That's human. The problem is when your worth becomes negotiable, depending on who says what, who claps, who nods. In the Roman courts, the crowd's roar could decide a gladiator's fate. But you are not a gladiator performing for cheers. You're a man walking his own path. And if that path is guided by principle, not popularity, then confidence follows, quietly but fiercely. The antidote? Do things that matter to you even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. Let the applause die down and keep walking. You ever notice how a tree doesn't ask the wind for permission to grow? It simply reaches for the light, season after season. That's your job too. Grow anyway, even if no one claps. And then there's the habit of overthinking. You turn every decision into a mental chess match. You replay conversations like game footage. You obsess over what to say, how you looked, whether you were enough. You overanalyze, not because you're weak, but because you fear making the wrong move. And that fear becomes the paralysis that drains your power. Confidence doesn't survive in the company of hesitation. Stoicism teaches us that clarity comes from action, not endless thought. Don't explain your philosophy, said Epictetus. Embody it. The Stoics weren't impulsive, but they weren't paralyzed either. They believed in preparation, yes, but more than that, they believed in showing up. A man could die tomorrow. That truth made action urgent, not perfect, but present. And that's what confidence feeds on. Movement, motion, momentum. Next time you find yourself trapped in a mental loop, remember this. It's not about finding the perfect answer. It's about making a choice and learning from it. Because even a wrong move teaches more than a life spent frozen. A ship can't be steered if it's anchored in the harbor. You want direction? Cut the rope, start moving. Even if the wind is uncertain, you'll learn more in motion than in waiting. There's also the habit of self-betrayal, the quiet breaking of promises you make to yourself. You say you'll wake up early, but you hit snooze. You say you'll speak your truth, but you stay silent. You tell yourself you'll stop numbing out, but the bottle, the screen, the distraction pulls you back in. Every time you do this, your subconscious takes notes. You become someone you can't trust, and trust is the bedrock of confidence. The Stoics knew this intimately. Their entire philosophy was a call to integrity, to align your actions with your values. Not sometimes, always. Because when your inner and outer life match, you stand taller. You don't need to fake anything. You become solid, grounded, free. Fixing this isn't about becoming perfect. It's about keeping small promises, one by one. You say you'll do 10 push-ups. Do them. You say you'll speak with honesty. Speak. The more you follow through, the more you trust yourself. And the more you trust yourself, the more unshakable you become. Picture a bridge built from thin glass. Would you drive across it? Now imagine one made from stone, layer by layer. That's what self-trust is, a stone bridge, built with each kept promise. The question is, are you laying stone or just hoping to fly? And that's when you realize it was never the world outside that needed to change. It was the silent contracts you signed with your habits, the way you let convenience replace discipline, the way you let comfort become your cage. When you constantly run from discomfort, you unknowingly train your body to fear life. You teach your nervous system that pain equals danger rather than growth, that uncertainty equals death rather than opportunity. You see, every time you hit snooze, every time you scroll instead of speak, every time you avoid the conversation, the truth, the mirror, you're trading your strength for temporary peace. And slowly but surely your confidence dies not with a bang, but with a whisper. But let's pause. Think back to a moment you were proud of, not the loud wins, but the quiet ones. That one time you said no, that one time you stayed with the discomfort, that one time you didn't need to explain yourself, but simply stood still. That was your essence. That was the Stoic you buried under noise, under performance, under habits that no longer serve you. And here's the paradox. The path back isn't made of grand resolutions. It's made of small rejections. Rejecting the impulse to react, rejecting the need to prove, rejecting the constant craving for more. It's in the man who walks into a room and doesn't feel the need to dominate. It's in the woman who speaks only when she truly has something to say. It's in you, right now, choosing awareness over autopilot. Maybe the most damaging habit of all is the habit of forgetting who you really are. Not the version you constructed to fit in, not the one you polished for others, but the one you knew when you were alone, before the world told you what to want. Stoicism isn't about becoming perfect. It's about remembering what you were born with: calm, clarity, and an unshakable center. Take Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, surrounded by power, praise, and endless temptations to believe he was more than just a man. And yet, in his journals, he wrote not to the world, but to himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That wasn't performance, that was a reminder, a ritual of remembering. And maybe that's what you need too, not more self-improvement plans, but more self-remembering moments. Because every time you act from fear, every time you seek validation instead of truth, you reinforce a story that you are not enough. But every time you sit with discomfort, every time you tell yourself the truth, even when it stings, you reclaim a little piece of your confidence. Not the noisy kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't need to be proven. And what if confidence isn't something to build, but something to uncover, like a statue beneath a sheet of dust, already complete beneath years of habits and distractions? What if your job isn't to add, but to subtract, to unlearn, undo, unwind, to sit still long enough to hear the voice that has never wavered, your own? What's left when you stop trying to impress, when you no longer chase comparison, when you stop needing to be understood and instead choose to understand? What's left might be terrifying in its silence, but beautiful in its strength. That's the Stoic path. Not loud, not rushed, but firm. Not flashy, but free. So here's the final question I'll leave you with. If you were to let go of just one habit this week, just one small, silent act of self-sabotage, what might return to you? What version of yourself might quietly step back into the room? Let that be the start. Not a sprint, not a revolution, just a returning.